I'm going to ask you to go back to the beginning and start that whole thing, right?
Okay, great.
If you look at what it is that I'm sharing on screen right now, right?
Yeah.
I think that there's something really, really interesting in taking the idea of triple bottom line, which originally is people, planet, or planet, people, profit, or people, planet,
It's
profit.
people first, usually.
Right.
Yeah. And we argue that planet actually needs to be first.
And this is an interesting, interesting thing. But I think that your characterization of this as prosperity rather than profit is really, really important. I noticed doing some research for an article that I'm writing that if you were to, for example, go to The Economist, right, and look at this, or Investopedia, for example, and look at this phrase, right, profit goes first. Right. And what I'm suggesting, and this is something that I've talked about before on Clubhouse, is that beliefs inform actions, and actions have consequences, and the words and phrases that you use inform your beliefs, right? So if you can, talk about how good for you, good for farmers, good for the planet, informs the GoodSam mission, and we can pick this up on Friday about how this manifests itself in terms of actions on the ground.
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm a chocolatier. I'm a trained chef. I'm a chocolatier. I've been in the mainstream American market in chocolate for a really long time. And one of the things I realized throughout the course of my career was that I needed to appeal in my marketing messages to the consumer first. What was the company that I had a hand in or created or was creating the product for? What could it do for the consumer first? That's always what we have to lead with when we're marketing to a mass market consumer. They want to know first, what does it do for me? What does it do for my family? What does it do for my friend that I give it to? Or is it going to help me achieve my health goals, right? I've been in the natural products industry for a really long time. So that's been a priority. We talk about good for farmers because we work in a direct trade model where we have no middlemen in our entire system, which I think is important to note because most companies do have middlemen in their system. And what that does is it is somebody taking another slice of the pie. And what that creates is there's a duality to that, right? There's the farmer who's not getting paid enough, and there's the consumer who has to pay more and more and more. And the farmer keeps getting pushed down, and the consumer has to pay more and more and more, right? So we've established a really great deal of trust. We reinvest 1% of all our top line sales instead of putting it into third-party intermediary organizations. We do it ourselves, and we have decolonialized that system essentially because we sit at the table with our farmers and we let them decide what's going to happen with that money, and we work alongside them to make those goals a reality, right? And sometimes they're doing more of the work. Sometimes we're involved a lot more. It just kind of depends on what it is that we agree to at the end of it. And good for the planet because we only work in regenerative systems. We really believe in regenerative agriculture. We believe that sort of the soil will save us in so many ways, or at least it's a big, big component of that. And that every food company has the responsibility, including chocolate companies and especially chocolate companies, because there's such a low-hanging fruit, pun intended, way of getting into those regenerative systems and strengthening them, especially in the cacao supply chain. It's one of the best ways to get it done. There are so many smallholder farmers and indigenous people farming cacao in particular, right? So
Heather, I don't want to have this teaser trailer go on forever.
Okay.
I want people to actually come on Friday and visit and participate in the stream. So if you're watching this and any of what it is that Heather is saying today sounds interesting to you, please join us this coming Friday, which is December 3rd. It's going to be at noon Eastern time, streaming here live on YouTube and on Facebook.
I'm so looking forward to it.
So Heather, well, welcome,
Hi.
and thanks for sitting through that interview. When we recorded that
Mhm.
earlier in the week, you were in Miami,
I
and
was, yes.
you're now back in your home office in Connecticut. But
Yes,
as I recall, you were at Art Basel, and it's
I
sort of
was.
interesting. Okay, you're in the chocolate business, but you're at Art Basel, and a part of Art Basel was just called Regenaissance, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
And talking about economics or business to people who I would normally think of were more interested in art than they are in business and economics, but there is an overlap. Having gone to art school, we need to promote ourselves. But you were also immediately, or your presentation immediately preceded that of Deepak Chopra. Right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
mind blown. What was that all about? Now that
Well,
you've had 48 hours to think about it.
yeah, no. So Regenaissance was the brainchild of Tony Cho, who runs Future of Cities down in Miami. Amanda Joy Ravenhill, the CEO of Buckminster Fuller Institute, and Habitual. A lot of different companies kind of coming together who have similar types of missions around the future of humanity and how we move through the world. And I think Art Basel was such an interesting format to choose because really art can show us a mirror to life and what we're doing in the world. And I think that was really where Tony and Amanda and the whole creative team and execution team that put Regenaissance together was coming from. How can we show people what we're doing in the world, understand that there's an urgency there from a climate, agricultural, human, artistic element. There's an urgency there for us all to get on board and to start having these conversations.
And how can art in the broadest terms, right, convey important messages? Because if we think about musical culture and other kinds of culture, these are things which catch on extremely quickly, right,
Yeah.
and can very, very efficiently and very, very effectively convey some pretty interesting messages. um, so I get so is the connection more regenerative agriculture and what it is that Good Sam is doing in
Yeah.
that respect, or something else?
Yeah, I think, it is regenerative agriculture, of course, but I think it's also the business of, here are the ideas, or here's the mirror, here's what we're doing, right? Here's what we're doing to the planet. The idea and the anger or the urgency is one component of getting us to action. But we also know that business is a course of action in this as well. And there's a lot of money that's going to need to be filtered into these types of initiatives in order to drive them forward. And commerce is one of them, right? So a company like Good Sam and what we do in terms of regenerative agriculture and really committing to regenerative agriculture and committing to growing regenerative agriculture is extremely important in that narrative, right? Because that's how we get mainstream consumers involved pretty immediately, right? Into, okay, I really like a macadamia nut, or I like this chocolate bar, or I like this coffee. But what they may not realize initially that they do eventually realize is like, I'm part of this movement. I bought this and this directly contributes to this solution, right? That someone else is working on that maybe I can't work on,
Right.
but I want to contribute to in some way. Because oftentimes, like most people, they don't know how to get involved, right? So I think that, for us to be involved there, and even Full Cycle, who was there with us, it really was, it's that bridge between investors and business and art and humanity and the greater picture of things and how we put it all together in order to drive solutions.
So I want to put a pin on that right there and go back for people who are watching today or who will be watching in the future who may not know what regenerative agriculture means. Describe regenerative agriculture for us?
Yeah, so regenerative agriculture is really it's a set of principles, and it's not a one size fits all. So a lot of people think, when you say regenerative agriculture, it must be a system like organic. So organic, for instance, when you think of USDA organic certification, there are basic tenets that need to be met. You may not use these types of chemicals. You need to, make sure that the waterway is free from runoff of inorganic materials, right? They're looking at a subset of data on every farm and to make sure certain processes are being done in order to gain that certification. regenerative is many, many different principles that can create regeneration. And the main tenet of regenerative farming is protection, preservation, regeneration, and restoration of soil. That is the main premise of regenerative agriculture. And so all of the processes around regenerative agriculture, they all feed into that main point. How do we create soil health in any way that we possibly can? No chemicals really involved, right? Like it's a very small subset of chemicals that can actually be put in that system. So it's a real old way of farming. You know, one of the ways I describe regenerative agriculture is to our farmers, our smallholder farmers around the world, our indigenous farmers around the world. It's just farming to them because they live in remote areas. They can't get tills. They can't get certain chemicals. So to them, these practices are very historical to them. They're generational, they're cultural, right? They're in the fiber of their being versus, you know, what we've done here in the Western world, tilling, chemicals, all of it. You know, which served us for a period of time. So I don't want to demonize those processes. For a long time, those processes served us, and we actually got higher yields out of it. We were able to feed more people, but now we understand a lot more about soil health. And because we know that we have got to go back to these other principles in order to protect the soil, or we're going to start losing topsoil, which means we're going to have desertification all around the world.
So if I can, you know, one of the things that GoodSam talks about is direct trade. And so Laura, who is watching from Facebook, right, says, you know, in all of this, more and more people are more concerned about where things come from. So how does, in the GoodSam model, this notion of being able to have a direct chain of custody? So, you know, you go to the farm and you pick things up and they come to the factory, right? You know, how does that fit into, you know, the larger message? Because I think most people would think about that as sustainability in general, right? And regenerative farming is one aspect of that.
It is. And so, you know, you know this about me, Clay. I've been in this industry for over a decade, and I have worked with fair trade groups, and I'm not demonizing the fair trade groups. I just really early in my career, I was in Belize and I was with Alex Whitmore of Taza Chocolate. And Alex ran a direct trade program down in Belize. And he actually has run them in several countries from now.
This was down in Toledo with the Toledo Cacao Growers Association?
I think so. I have to go back and look at exactly where we were, but it was, you know, over a decade ago. So it was very, very early in my career. And I remember, you know, being with some of the farmers who were working with Green and Blacks at the time, and them talking about fair trade and how it really didn't serve them. You know, one of the farmers actually described it to me. He said, if they make us build another community center, I'm going to go live in it because I really just need a toilet, right? So what I started to understand really early in my travels at NibMor, my first chocolate company, was that fair trade didn't work for everybody. You know, the fair trade premium typically gets paid into the associations and cooperatives. They typically take a lot of that money for their operating costs, and that's great. And it helps to establish community, and it helps the community to be working at a real optimal level, and for there to be real organization. When it comes to the social programs, there's a little bit of a one size fits all mentality. And part of that is just because a lot of the fair trade groups have gotten very large. But at GoodSam, we, you know, because Sam Stroop, my co-founder, had such strong relationships in supply chain and such direct relationships with the farmers individually, the heads of the co-ops, the heads of the associations, what we were really able to do was come in and say, okay, we're going to keep developing those direct relationships. We're going to hire in country. We're going to make sure we have a presence in and out of those areas. And we're going to ask them what they need. And we're going to develop these social human contracts, right? Based on what the communities actually need to thrive. What do they need? What do they want? And so oftentimes I say, you know, we're sitting around the table and we'll be like, okay, guys, so this is what we think. This is what we see. And they're like, yeah, no, actually what we want to do is this. And, you know, we have to take that really seriously, because we're there to buy a product, right? We're not living in the day-to-day of our smallholder farmers and the indigenous communities that we partner with. And so they always win, and we work alongside them either in, like I said in the clip, in a smaller capacity, depending on how they want us to be involved, or a larger capacity when more resources are needed to come in from the outside, especially.
You mentioned something interesting during the trailer, which was about decolonialization.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I have always thought about when I think about programs like quote unquote fair trade, a number of things, one of which is who decides what's fair. And there is a lot of colonialism speak in that notion of, if I can, white man from the global north telling brown man in the global south what's fair, there's that. But also, the way that these things tend to work is that we have a set of values up here, right? And what we're doing is we're asking you, right? This is the farmer or the cooperative, to adopt our values, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to ask you to pay for the privilege of adopting our values, right? And then we're not going to accept any of the market risk. You're going to accept all of the market risk about it. So you talk about decolonializing. And what I would say is that, fair trade, I have often referred to as a form of socially acceptable economic imperialism. And so I think that one of the ways that small makers, and GoodSam, although it is it is serving a mass market as opposed to the craft chocolate market, right? This notion of taking personal responsibility. So we are not going to abdicate our personal responsibility for making sure that we deliver what we say we're going to be delivering. I was very, very fortunate to help Sean Eskenazi at the start, right?
Yeah,
and in terms
great.
of helping start Eskenazi Chocolate. But I think that, what aspects of the model that GoodSam is working on are ones that you think are modeling good behavior, right? And are things that other companies, which may be slightly smaller than you and have different resource constraints, might be able to learn from, either in terms of the logistics or how they present their messages to other parts of the world.
Yeah. So I think for us as a company, in terms of decolonializing the system, if Sam and I are two white founders, that's not lost on us. We have a tremendous amount of privilege. And, our job is to blast this out into the marketplace and sell as much of it as we can so that we can create major impact within our communities by reinvesting in them, right? We see it in a very different way. We see it as reinvestment. We're not a charity, right? We are a for-profit company, but we believe that when you invest in these communities, that you are investing in the future of your company as well. It's all interconnected, right? And I think one of the things that we do well, and I like to talk, Clay, you've known me for a long time,
I've never noticed that, Heather.
I do a lot of shutting up and sort of listening when we're in the field, because it is, again, I'm not on my turf, right? I'm not here in the US just blasting out my marketing message. When we're within our communities, it is about them, and it is about what they are trying to accomplish and how we can align our goals together in order to accomplish what it is that they're trying to accomplish as a community and what we're trying to accomplish as a company. I think, so Sam and I oftentimes, especially because we hire in country, we allow our employees who are there on the ground to do most of the talking with communities. And we sit there and listen, and we are absorbing, and we join the conversation in a lot of late ways, because we're just trying to absorb what they're saying to us. It's really important to have that, right? Because I think for a long time, to your point, as white Westerners, we come in and we're like, you must do this. And I think we've tried to really turn that around and create a 180 to say, no, we're going to sit here and listen. We want something from you. So we're going to listen for a long time before we figure out exactly how we're going to do this. And I think that has served us really well as a company and as founders in the field. I think if more founders listened to their communities and, took that really seriously, we would be in a different system. We see a lot of distrust in the system. And we have to keep showing up sometimes with some of the communities before we can even get to the purchasing point, right? It takes a lot of us showing up over and over again. in
Yeah,
order
I think many of these communities have been burned many
many
times
times.
over now generations. And
Yes.
so developing trust is really important. But I think, for me, one of the fundamental early lessons that I learned is my first my first two trips to Origin were in Ecuador. And then I went to Belize. And then I'm trying to remember if there's any place else that I went, maybe Costa Rica, but I did Costa Rica, Grenada, and Bolivia multiple times in 1 year, right? And what really became apparent to me was that what I knew about the cocoa culture of Ecuador, I couldn't apply
Exactly.
to anywhere else. So later, Bolivia and Peru and Ecuador, they're right next to each other, but they're culturally very different places. And so you need to go in with a sense of humility, right?
Absolutely.
And and I think that we can take a look at things which are top down driven as opposed to bottom up driven, right? As a good place to say this is the wrong way to do things,
Yeah.
right? That this needs to come from that other place. But one of the other things that you and I have talked about is this notion of communicating about sustainability, right? And so in Europe we have this notion that sustainability is more associated with social justice, and in America we have this notion that sustainability is more about recycling. At Good Sam, you sit and you have some messages which appear to appeal to more of a craft chocolate or more a ethically, socially, environmentally conscious
Mhm.
kind of person, and then you have this whole other thing that you're doing, which is about better for you, healthier for you, keto, no sugar, all these other kinds of things. And if you're not careful, what you end up doing is, if you focus on one set of messages, right, then that this other market doesn't respond to you, right? And so how do you go about bridging that divide, or walking that line, and being able to speak more broadly to people?
Yeah. I think there's, of course, when we're talking to things like people like the keto market, it's a really specific niche group of people. And I think the social media and the internet and sort of funnel marketing has been able to help us take care of a little bit of that, right? And understanding which audiences are responding to which messages and how we market to different people based on
Hmm.
what it is that they're trying to accomplish, whether it be their health goals or broader social mission goals.
Hmm.
And I think, or planetary goals. So we do have different ways of speaking to different audiences, right? And I think, again, the modern world has given us that luxury. I think, 15 years ago, you kind of couldn't do that so much. You kind of had to pick one message and you could lose people, depending on that.
Hmm.
But we're lucky that we're doing this company in this age rather than, when I started NibMor and no one understood the
Right.
internet.
Yeah.
And I think, so yeah, I think we do a good job, with speaking to different audiences. The mission always, because I've been doing this a long time in the mainstream market, I've always known that when you're trying to reach that mid-level market, right? You're trying to reach the masses. You have to tell them what the product is going to do for them. And for better or worse, that's our culture, especially here in the United States. Telling people, what will this do for me? If I purchase this, what will it do for me? What will it do for my family? Some people will then fall in love with the brand or fall in love with the product and care deeply about the mission. Some people won't, right?
Hmm.
I think it's more, some people want it for taste. Some people want it for sustainability. Some people, it's a mixed bag. And I think for any company now, there are different reasons people come to your products. And you have to learn how to speak to them and what the balance is between those messages. It's a hard line,
No, absolutely. And what I want to jump in there is that, I mean, in many respects, I think there's the focus is, I've talked to people about, people will buy something once out of curiosity,
Sure.
right? They'll buy something a second time because they are intrigued by it and they just want to reinforce their original perception.
Or they love the taste, right?
Well, yeah, but I think what you have to do is you have to get that consumer to the third purchase. And if you get the
Yeah, I think
consumer to
so.
the third purchase, so even though people may be attracted to a brand by no sugar added, non-GMO, vegan, all these kinds of things, fundamentally, especially when you're talking about chocolate, it is about taste.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so how do you go about, what is the process for recipe development at Good Sam Foods? I mean, is this you and Sam sitting together? Is it the entire team that's sitting together?
You
Or
know,
do you involve, people like me who are going to give you outside feedback, or how do you do that?
it depends on the product line for us, right?
Okay.
So obviously I have a background in chocolate. So the minute that we decided we were going to do chocolate at Good Sam, mouthfeel is just really, really important to me as a chocolatier. It always has been. It was something that Jen and I really obsessed about over at NibMor, for it not to be that chalky, dry, or a cacao profile that was going to really suck the moisture out of your mouth. We
Right.
were never big fans of that. There are people who are really big fans of that and connoisseurs of, and I love all different types of chocolate. It's just in the mainstream, when we were really analyzing the market, we were like, okay, it needs to be creamy. It needs to be sweet. It needs to be all the comfort and all of that the people are really looking for when they think of chocolate. Right. So yes. So I went
I'm looking at
back
this,
to that.
right? And
Yeah.
we'll get into a tasting in the last part of this thing.
Yeah.
But as a part of that, I'm looking at this, and if I was a craft chocolate person,
Mhm.
right, 55% is not the place I would start off with. But
Well, that's
55%,
allulose, right? That's because of allulose. We use a sweetener called allulose, and
okay,
allulose is only 70% as sweet as sugar. So when we were trying to really match that mass market taste point,
mhm,
we tried to go at 70, but it tasted like 100% bar. So we had to back out of it a little bit.
gotcha.
And that was really, so we did do a lot of back and forth on that. And of course, because of my background, I led that charge on the chocolate side. There are other product lines that Sam and team have more feedback in, but I think I was a big stickler on it has to match a certain sweetness profile and it's got to match a certain texture in the mouth. And that really, for me on the chocolate side, was extremely important. And the same thing with our baking mixes. Our baking mixes, because I'm a pastry chef as well, they had to really operate like a regular Betty Crockers and not like a health food. Oh my God, I have to do 15 steps, right? So there are certain product lines I have a lot more feedback in, and there are certain product lines that I don't. Like our macadamia nuts. And, Sam is a huge salty snack guy. He's not really a sweet guy. So the salt level on the macadamia nuts was like all Sam being like, no, I want a little bit more. I want a little bit less. And I think he struck a really great balance there.
It's a real challenge. I worked on the development of an enrobed nut line for someone, an enrobed nibs, and getting the balance of the roast level of the nut and the roast level of the mac nut specifically, right? And then figuring out how much salt to put on that nut.
Salt is a big deal.
Right.
It is like, it's a big deal.
It was insane, the back and forth we went in trying to figure out doing that. And people may not think about this, but when you're trying to pan cashew nuts,
oh my God, you see
the little shape in there is like, it's really
so
really
hard.
difficult.
We still struggle with it even at Good Sam, but consumers love them so much. I mean, that's sort of like a little cult product, or cashew nuts, the candy coated ones, and getting that little cavity, it's almost impossible. But people who love it, they love it, and they go long on it. They don't care that the little cavity doesn't have the candy coating in it.
I totally get it. And I'm looking at what you're doing. So this is almonds.
Our almonds.
And I'm not going to start tasting them right now. But when I think candy coated, I think of the melt in your mouth, not in your hands, candy coated shell.
Sure.
There's no sugar shell on this.
No, it's Isomalt. We use Isomalt.
They're chocolate coated. It's the same 55%.
Yep, same 55%.
Using for everything else. So just wanted to make sure they're not actually candy coated.
No. So we call it a candy coated nut, but Isomalt is something actually that pastry chefs use a lot. Typically we use it in decoration, but Isomalt panned really, really well. We tried to pan allulose. It's almost impossible.
I would imagine.
we moved to a non-GMO isomalt source, and it's a very small percentage of the product. So isomalt is a sugar alcohol, but as you can see, there's almost no sugar or alcohol added in the product because it's such a small coating on the outside of the actual pieces. But it was tricky. That was tricky to get the no sugar added on those and find the right coating that also wasn't going to disturb people's guts, right? So using it in a really small amount so that it wasn't a problem.
That is one of the challenges with sugar alcohols. I mean, most notoriously, I think, with maltitol, right?
Yeah.
Which is if you were not careful about how much you consumed, you end up with gastrointestinal distress, which is a polite way of putting it. And so, I definitely understand the challenges associated with there. But so it seems like what it is that you're doing is a natural progression from what it is that you and Jen started at NibMor, but there's this couple of years in between where what you're doing is you're working to a broader natural foods, natural products market in general as the bridge. You're working in New York City, you've got, this career doing all this kind of stuff, and you want to go join another startup. Why? Right. So,
it's funny. And actually my husband's across the room right now. So if you hear him start laughing, that's why. Yeah. I really didn't think I was going to do another startup. I had done a few, and I had joined the leadership of a few startups and helped them to escalate. And I really enjoyed it. But at the time that Sam walked into my office at Beyond Brands, I was a consultant, and I was a pretty sought after consultant because of chocolate and because of my time in the natural products industry, helping to develop brands. So I was working a little bit more ad hoc on projects, shorter term contracts, kind of trying to come in and make my mark. And Sam he's my first client at Beyond Brands, and he kept working on me. So Sam actually offered me to come in and run the company very early, and I said no. And maybe Sam's going to hate me saying that, but he did, and I said no. And Michael and my husband and I talked about it, and he was like, okay, just like, let's see where this goes. And we were very kind of nervous about it for a while. Like, do I really want to go do this again? I'm not sure, And then we decided that, as the company evolved, and especially after the first time I went to Colombia, that was it for me. I was hooked. When I knew, especially, like I said, very early in my career, fair trade really bothered me. And because of that, seeing that direct trade opportunity was really, really great to get that underway and to get that taken care of, or, just put into a company where I could get really excited about it. I could feel with Sam and team, because the very early team started to develop around this idea in the first year. And it was exciting. It started to get really, really exciting.
Yeah. I have spent most of my adult career working in small companies and startups, and I definitely get both the upside and the downside of doing so. And fortunately, I've been in the personal position to be able to have a structure around me, which would enable me to go and take those risks. Which is, first for me is like, oh, there are no professional chocolate critics. Let me become one, right? And what does that mean? And we had a conversation on Clubhouse. I'm not sure if you were there, about this notion of passion. And I think that, passion is the intersection of finding something that interests you, finding something that you like, which I think that's different, right? Because there are a lot of things that interest me that I don't necessarily like.
Definitely.
And then finding something that you're good at.
Yeah.
Right. And when the three of those things come together, you think about, I think about, if I'm a pastry chef in a kitchen and I'm not, and I'm sort of in production, right? It's a particular kind of mindset.
Oh yeah.
Right? And personality. And I know about myself.
I tried that for a while, and I was
like, no, right? And there's something about, there's a new hill to conquer and a new challenge every day. And that's not production in a pastry kitchen or a confectionery kitchen. So what part of what it is that you're doing, right, at GoodSam, number one, is what interests you? And it could be many, many things. What do you like to do? And what do you think you're good at doing?
Um, oh wow, this is a really interesting question and a little unexpected. But I think from a very
Maybe
early
that's why
age,
Kavanch wished you luck, right, in the
yeah.
comments over on LinkedIn.
Exactly. No, I think, from a very early age, I was a performer my whole life before I was an entrepreneur. And I always felt that performing was, there's a very famous Glenn Close quote where she talks about when you get up on stage and you tell a story that really resonates with people, how it actually changes their chemical makeup, right?
Mhm.
And that was what drew me to being a performer, this idea that you could impact people from a psychological level to potentially walk out of that theater or shut off that movie and change something fundamentally about their lives. And I think as an entrepreneur, I've also sought that out, right? This idea of having an experience with a piece of chocolate has always, when I was first starting my career, and I was at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, chocolate was always on the menu with every dietary theory. It was always the one thing that everyone could have. And that was really interesting for me, right?
Mhm.
And I was a big chocolate lover my whole life. And so I thought, wow, what an interesting career. This is something like pretty much everybody loves and everyone can have no matter what they're doing with whatever else they're putting in their body. That was really interesting for me. And then I
Mhm.
think the impact piece of it, even at NibMor, which was really early days, again, for the natural products industry and very difficult for us to get involved in some of those concepts. That was the piece that really drove Jen and I both early in
Mhm.
our careers. And then I think for me, just kept being like, how do I do more? How do we make more impact through a brand? How do we bring more people to the table? How do we make this more community than competition? It started, I think, for GoodSam, that's really what drives me every day. What is the impact of this brand? Yes, it's the enjoyment, right, of the product. But then behind that enjoyment, how much impact can we create? How many people's lives can we connect
Mhm.
through this product and this company?
Mhm.
And how many solutions can we be a part of as a result? I
Mhm.
mean, that's a really interesting thing to get out of
Mhm.
bed for every morning. And I think it's the thing that drives Sam and I so much every single day.
I completely agree. When I started the Chocolate Life, actually, I started chocophile.com back in 2001. And when my book was published, Discover Chocolate in 2007, I had to step back, do a SWOT analysis, strength, weaknesses, opportunity, whatever
Yeah, yeah.
SWOT, whatever it means. Um, and I realized that what had happened is over the course of the intervening 6 or 7 years, that the market had significantly changed, right? So what was, for me, a labor of love, very, very much. But as somebody who had the responsibilities of supporting a family,
Mm,
how do you compete with people with these new blogging platforms can give it away for free? Right?
mm,
You can't compete with free. It just
yeah,
doesn't work. And
no.
so coming out of Discover Chocolate and that book, what I realized that what I could do, which these bloggers couldn't do, right, was to work on the notion of creating community, right?
Yeah.
And that for me, not knowing what I'm likely to do when I get up in the morning. What challenge am I going to be today? Is it physics? Is it chemistry? Are we talking about economics, sociology?
It is.
Am I
It's
going to
all
be
wrapped
doing
up
new
in this
recipe
industry.
development?
Yeah.
It is the fact that chocolate provides me with this lens to look at the world, and I have yet to find an aspect of human existence, right, which cannot be connected to chocolate in some way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for me, that is the thing that interests me about it, is making these connections. And it's also what I think it's what my art school training, right, trained me for, is to be able to look at things and be able to see connections, which is one of the reasons why I'm also really, really interested about this Art Basel connection, going back to the beginning.
Yeah. I
Right.
know. You were really into that.
Yeah,
I
no,
love
no,
it. I love it.
I'm trained as a photographer. That's what I went to. That's what I went to art school for, and I
Mm,
use it on a daily basis. I use it to document my travels. It becomes a part of what it is that I do, and it becomes a part of the way I see the world and the way I can communicate with these things. And many people, as a chef, for example, I see the world in a particular way. I taste the world in a particular way, and I share that vision with people in a particular medium. It just happens to be food, as opposed to pictures, as opposed to be paintings or whatever it is. And we're going to do a really inelegant segue coming out of that.
I just want to say one really quick thing to Laura, who
Okay.
wrote, very interesting. You say everyone loves chocolate. Believe you me, though, everyone who doesn't love chocolate, literally for the past decade plus that I've been in chocolate, they always tell me when they don't love it. I don't know if you get that too, Clay, where someone will be like, oh my God, I love what you just said. I love that I just heard you say, but I really don't like chocolate. And I always find those people. I just had one at Art Basel. He was like, I love what you guys are. I was like, well, then eat macadamia nuts or coffee or whatever else we have. But I find it hilarious because, you know, so many people rally around chocolate. Right. And then it's like the one guy who doesn't like chocolate. It always comes up to me without fail.
Right. It's not a polarizing topic.
It's not.
Right. And it's one that people can get behind, even if it's not necessarily one that they particularly crave.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And yet it's always, please, have you tried ours? You know,
I know.
It will change. Maybe it will.
You know, I learned really early when I would sample. So back in the day at NibMor, I would sample, I would go and do the samplings. And, you know, people would say to me things like, well, I don't really like chocolate or whatever. And, you know, and I would say that, I would say, but you haven't tried ours. And then they'd be like, no, I still don't like chocolate.
You know, I opened up the 55% dark.
Yep.
And number one is putting your nose in a 55%, which is sort of at the high end of what people would think of as a bittersweet in those terms. I mean, there's no legal definition for semi-sweet or bittersweet. Right. It's all sweet chocolate. Because you're using allulose and you're not using cane sugar, there is no aroma of sweetness whatsoever. No. Right. And so what comes through here probably is more of a roast profile.
Yeah.
I mean, there is, so that's the first thing you get. It doesn't smell like a 55%. It smells more like a 80 or 90.
It does, right?
Interestingly enough. Yep. And so what it is you don't have the sweetness of the sugar hiding. Yeah. Right. The roast profile. And the roast profile is the number one component of, you know, the nose of this. And it, you know, it's really interesting. It's got a nice even snap, so it's tempered well. It's got an easy bite and chew. Again, when people look at something like erythritol, for example, right? It's a very hard crystal.
It's a sugar alcohol. So allulose is not a sugar alcohol.
I understand that, but it's a crystal, which is very hard and is a challenge to be able to refine into chocolate. Sure. Right? Allulose, my understanding, is it's a different form. And so one of the things that happens is you're not working against the granularity of the sugar. So for many people, it's like there's still some sandiness, right? And some of it is, am I able to refine the sugar into what's going on? Right. And with allulose, there's none of that.
There's none of that. No. So it's, you know, again, mouthfeel is really, really important to me just as a chocolatier. Just for my own personal preferences, I like that creaminess. I just, somebody at Art Basel who is from Switzerland and his family is in the chocolate business. He's like, oh my God, you like it. He's like, this tastes like a Swiss chocolate to me, which was a huge compliment, right? From someone who's eaten chocolate his entire life and really loves that mouthfeel. So I really, you know, I tend to go, and if anybody out there has even tried NibMor, I tend to go a little higher cocoa butter. Even at NibMor, we did that. Higher cocoa butter ratio in order to get that mouthfeel. And then, of course, allulose doesn't present the same challenges that stevia, monk fruit, and erythritol do, right? So in the no sugar added realm, we just, it operates similarly and yet very different in execution. So I think, you know, it took us a long time to nail that down. It was, you know, because we're one of the first doing it. So it is a challenge, right? And the one we were willing to take, and the co-manufacturers that we've been working with have been willing to take as well. So we were very lucky to find the right partners. No,
absolutely. And I just ended up writing an article, and I'll put a link on the Chocolate Life in today's interview. So if you go to if you're watching this either live or in the future, if you go to TheChocolateLife.com, there is a tag which is at the bottom of the page called live stream. And if you click on the live stream tag, I'm just starting an archive of past episodes as well as future episodes that have been scheduled. And you go there, you can find the story, you can find links that have been talked about during here. And what I'll do is I'll put a link to this article that I just finished for International Confectionery Magazine on alternative sugars. So we do mention allulose and sort of the history of sweetening chocolate, which is really, really quite fascinating and interesting. I've got here the next one, again, still 55%, but sea salt and nibs. So
this is a recipe. So anything that I do with sea salt is a recipe I've been refining since my early days at NibMor. Sea salt is and still we do get some people who say they don't like the level of salt, that it's too, but you're always going to get that. If you put sea salt in anything, literally you're going to have people who love it. You're people who are like, it's too much salt or it's too little salt, right? So even on like our salted macadamia nuts, we have the same thing. It's like we're trying to strike a balance in between too much and too little. What that is super subjective. But I think we've hit a pretty good ratio, but I'm totally biased.
What's really interesting here, number one, is I'm a fan of rustic textured. I mean, I like chocolate that is super smooth. I mean, I grew up, the chocolate that got me into the chocolate business with Bonat, classic French, lots of added cocoa butter. It's just like, and I'm a
great texture. Yeah.
Mouthfeel texture kind of person to begin with. But I like things which are obviously crunchy. I love inclusions. Right. And so
me too.
So I would say, are the nibs in this bar the same roast level as the chocolate?
Yes, they are. Okay. Which is why you don't get that extra, you don't get a different taste to it, right? It sort of matches it. You don't get that sort of rainbow effect that some bars get when they're using a different roast level, right? So it matches the flavor profile of the bar. So for us, it's really more of a texture. It's like to add to the flavor of the actual base.
What's really interesting, however, is that the salt as an ingredient, one of the things it tends to do, it tends to open up your tongue and make it more receptive to other flavors.
Right.
What's really interesting about this nib bar is to me, it tastes a lot sweeter.
Right? Oh, interesting.
I think it tastes a lot sweeter because of the salt.
Yeah,
it's not
you get that juxtaposition between sweet and salty.
Yeah. I think it's really, really interesting. I was surprised at how, and I don't know if this is because of the salt, but the aroma, the roasty aroma, is not as prevalent on the nose. Yeah. It comes across as a milder, softer bar to me. And if you're watching this, I mean, there are no rights and wrongs when it comes to tasting. Every single one of us has our own sense of taste. We all have our own sense of smell. We have our own approaches to tasting. Right. It's really about understanding, right, what we like and what we don't like and why we don't like something in particular.
Sure.
And so for me, it's just fascinating understanding the interaction of salt, which in chocolate has a tendency to reduce bitterness. Right. Yes. So you can put salt in coffee. It's often used in espresso and it reduces bitterness. I'm sort of wondering if the sweetness component, right, is because there's a reduction in bitterness and the sweetness. So for me, it's really, really fascinating. And maybe, it's something that you want to go take a look at.
Yeah, interesting. No, I've not heard that feedback. So I love that.
Right. I want to acknowledge Keith, who's watching. And Keith, It's a fascinating question. We're not going to get to it right now. I don't want to interrupt the tasting component because I'm having too much fun doing the tasting right now. And the third bar I'm going to try right off is the salted caramel, which you say is naturally flavored. And I'm kind of interested in why you had to go and add naturally flavored to the label.
Yeah. So caramel, you can do caramel in, an inclusion that has actual caramel in it, which we were not looking to do with this bar. We were looking a little bit to mimic some of what our competitors were doing. Okay. And, I've worked with a natural flavor house since my days at NibMor. And so that natural flavor is organic, non-GMO, right? It's all the things that we're looking for. It's the cleanest natural flavor that we could get to do that bar. And we felt really confident in that flavor profile. In fact, it's crazy. People that we expect that bar just came out. We really do expect that bar to sort of eclipse the other three flavors, just because it's a popular flavor, right? It's a very popular flavor. People love caramel and chocolate. What's nice about this bar is it's like super easily transportable. You're not going to get the dings in it where you get the seepage from the caramel coming out. It's a little bit of a mass market play to us. If we were going to go a little bit more high end, then maybe we would do the beautiful caramel inside, inside that oozes out. That's not what we're trying to accomplish here. So that's the reason behind that.
Yeah. Again, what's interesting to me, one of the things that's interesting to me is that all three of these bars use the same base chocolate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there is just a radical difference in the perception of
Wait till you try the mint.
Well, we're going to do the mint at the end because mint, I have to say, mint is one of my least favorite flavors in chocolate.
Yeah.
Except if it's really over the top mint. Every once in a while, maybe once a year, a York peppermint patty. I'm not a fan of an Andes thin mint or an After Eight. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to go over the top when it comes to mint.
Well, I'm not going to say anything. I want to see how you react to the mint. That's going to be interesting.
Okay. But before you do that, what I want to do is I want to talk about the almonds. I want to talk about the nuts. So, because this is very inelegant to do this on. When you're, it's interesting because you say candy coating, and I tend to think of a lentil, a candy coated lentil.
Yeah.
There is a crunch.
Yes.
Associated with the candy covering here.
Yes.
Which is okay. Now I know why you could say candy.
It's supposed to mimic an M&M, right? Like an almond M&M or a peanut M&M. We just went a little further with the cashew to elevate it a little bit. We just really liked the way those came out. They're sort of our, I don't know, maybe the cashew is sort of something that Sam and I we just really loved them. We were like, wow, this is really great with a cashew. But
well, technically cashews are the hardest nuts to work with.
They are
because of their shape. It's also interesting here that you have a caramel colored chocolate. Oh, is it? Are they chocolate? I'm sorry.
So we the colors for all of those products are really interesting.
They're
all done with vegetable. So so the cashews are done with turmeric. The almonds are done with purple carrot, interestingly enough, and the peanuts are done with spirulina. Oh, you're muted, Clay.
I'm muted because I have a feeling that
the crunchy. So, yes.
Number one is, while I like the overall textural aspect of like a peanut M&M, right? I'm not a fan of the ethics associated with the production of them.
Yeah, of course.
And so, I'm going to try the peanuts next. But if you like yourself an almond version of an M&M, because one of the things you like is that candy crunch associated with it. Again, there's some sweetness, but it's not the same kind of sweetness.
It's not like
there's a brightness. There's a brightness in sugar that's that's missing from the allulose or the isomalt. The isomalt.
Yeah. Allulose is the chocolate component, and then the isomalt is the candy coating. So it, it's not as sweet as an M&M. We weren't going for the sweetness of an M&M. We were going more for the texture of an M&M. We knew we were never going to be able to match the sweetness of an M&M. But we get a lot of consumers who come to us and say, like, I love that this is not as sweet as M&M. Like, I love the M&Ms, like from the reference of being a kid, but I hate how sweet they are. I hate how like sickeningly sweet that is.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like an adult version, but you'd be surprised how many kids really like the product too.
Are you a George Carlin fan?
Yeah, my husband used to be a comedian, so yeah.
There's no blue food.
But there is.
Not blueberries. There is blue food, but blue? I mean, you said spirulina, and I normally think spirulina is green.
No, so when you mix spirulina with isomalt, you get this really beautiful blue color. And it's because, isomalt is white. It's white, and it also goes transparent at a certain point. So it kind of mutes out some of the greenish tones and brings out some of the blue. And it's been a real fine balance trying to get it to not go gray. So it's like, because at a certain point it tips, the color just tips. So as we all know, for those of you that are pastry chefs out there, like heat can change everything.
Oh, there are lots of colors which are not heat stable.
Yeah. So we were trying to mimic the fun of M&M in the colors, right? Of the idea of an M&M, or like an Unreal, right? Which is really just an M&M with cane sugar and not corn syrup.
Yep.
But in a healthier format where people could feel like I could eat a handful of these and I don't have to feel so bad about it. All right. It wasn't going to like destroy your whole day. Right. But there was still going to be a little fun to it, and a little.
Sometimes there are days which need to be destroyed.
Yeah, of course. And
but destroying with M&Ms as opposed to, cheap.
Look, I mean, the reason, so just so you know, the reason that I started a health journey when I started NibMor, and when allulose became part of our narrative and this whole idea of sugar free or no added sugar. Why? A lot of people ask me that. And it's because, when I started NibMor, Clay, the American public was struggling with obesity at like a 22 or 23% rate. In the year 2020, 42.2% of all American adults are now clinically classified as obese. And that, to me, as somebody who's putting out a mass market product into the mainstream, we had to think about, how are we going to do this, right? I couldn't do it in the same way I did it at NibMor. I had to think a little bit further. There are people out there who are really looking for solutions. And then there's people who are just like, I want to cut back a little bit, or today I don't want to do that. I want to just kind of get off sugar for a second, or I want to have a high quality product and not have sugar in it. And I think that really fueled the use of this sweetener in this particular line. We've been going in the wrong direction, and we've got to come up with some solutions that people can feel good about, and also feel like it tastes good, and it's not, those funky, weird sweeteners that are giving you so many bizarre flavors in your mouth.
Speaking of bizarre flavors, it's not a bizarre flavor, but mint. What's interesting is it changes the aroma of the chocolate, and it's not necessarily a bright minty flavor.
Right.
It's more on the fudgy side of things. So if I think about
I'd agree with that.
It's not the transformation I would have expected on my nose. The other thing is that the mint flavor itself is not overwhelming. Right.
It's not. I'll tell you why. I'm going to tell you all a story. You ready? I've never told the story of how I've developed mint products over the course of my career, because I've developed several. And we did a mint bar at NibMor. We did mint minis. We did mint drinking chocolate. And mint for me is one of those, it's a polarizing flavor. You either like it or you don't like it. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm a Midwestern girl. I come from the Midwest. I grew up on the Southwest side of Chicago. And one of my first jobs was at the Olive
Frango Mints.
No, Olive Garden.
Okay. Well, Olive Garden.
But Frango Mints from Marshall's was a huge piece of this too. Actually, it's great that you say that, because I grew up with Frango Mints, which are a little more of an understated mint flavor. They're not super overpowering. And again, Frango Mints, if for those of you who remember, have that coating on the outside that's really, really creamy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So when I was developing the mint product for NibMor, my whole thinking was, I worked at the Olive Garden as one of my first jobs. And one of the things we did was we would freeze the Andes candies that you get at the end. And people loved that. They loved getting the frozen Andes candies. And for those of us in the back, we would just like eat those all night long, right? And I was trying to match that sort of nostalgia of an Andes candy in a way that was more elevated, right? Mm-hmm. At first at NibMor with the organic, non-GMO and everything that we stood for there. And now here at GoodSam, giving people a little bit, but not that overpowering like toothpaste flavor that we come to associate with mint chocolate products, as you know.
Gotcha. No, understand. And, what's interesting, for me is not only is the mint not overwhelming, again, what it does is that, but there is a complement to the sweetener component. It tastes brighter.
Yeah.
It's brighter, and because of the mint and the way the mint works with the sugar. Really, really interesting. I want to be very, very cognizant of time here, but I also want to give you an opportunity to be able to answer Keith's question. Hopefully Keith is still in the room. And Keith says, have you got geopolitical issues, right, associated with your ability to get beans out of Colombia? And I would say, how have geopolitical issues affected your ability to work in Colombia? And Keith is a nutritionist by training, and he works especially with, I believe, pediatrics is his specialty. And so this notion of chocolate being healthy or healthier for you chocolate is important to him. And he asks, do you have any plans for something higher than 55% going forward?
We already have a 70% allulose bar that's ready to be produced. It's really more for us just about distribution and getting a wider market of, a wider distribution market for us. And I think, that's really important when you put out a single flavor like that, a 70% dark. It has a little bit to do with logistics on our end too, in terms of market penetration and volumes and things like that. So yes, we do have it, and we will release it at some point. We're just trying to figure out when the right moment is to do it.
Well, I can tell you that Keith is a contributor to The Chocolate Life. He is a nutritionist. He has written articles, one of which is on cadmium, which can be a challenge in Colombia, among other places, and is in New York. So this would be relatively easy to get to in terms of your early consumer testing.
Awesome.
Hey, Keith, I'm lobbying on your behalf.
Great.
To be able to do that.
Yeah, and then as far as the geopolitical issues, yes. I mean, every country that we work with, there are issues, climate issues, geopolitics, there's all kinds of things coming at us all the time. I think what our team, the operations team at GoodSam, does extremely well is that they're very forward looking. And because of that, we negotiate very far in advance when we see different things happening in politics, different things happening in climate. We're very long thinking. And so oftentimes we're already working on solutions months in advance of those situations. Right now, of course, with Colombia, we're gearing up for the elections in May.
Oh, yeah.
And we know that could potentially be a problem. So we've been working with all of our partners on the ground to pull product well in advance of that time period so that we're not looking at issues in supply chain during that. So, logistically, and I have to give Sam a lot of credit for this because he is, he's the very understated co-founder of GoodSam, and I'm often the person who's out in front of people. What I want people to understand is that, Sam and I complement each other extremely well. The idea that I could be out here doing all of this and running the supply chain on the back end is completely absurd. There's too many. We divide and conquer in a way that I think is really awesome for two founders. And he is a genius when it comes to managing that team and how they operate on the ground and how they execute on every single project that we work with in the field. I'm a little bit more involved on the direct trade side, but when it comes to that finished product and it's getting to the end of delivering it to the consumer, Sam Stroop, Marsha Bell, Tom Den Hartog, Lauren Appelt, Kelly Dusenberry, our whole team over at GoodSam, Kamal Kagundu over in Africa. I mean, these guys are working their butts off, and they're so forward thinking, and they're looking at everything that could go wrong at all times. And I'm so grateful as the leader of this company to have a group like that can really see that and plan for it. So we've been very fortunate that way.
Okay, so Heather, what I want to say is I think that's the perfect outro to the last hour that we spent together. I can't imagine, a better way to end the hour. I want to say thank you very much for spending the hour with us today, being able to discuss these things. If you have been watching live, I noticed that nobody has actually liked the video, so please do that while you're watching. And
I'm so captivated, Clay.
Well, they're just so focused on watching, they couldn't find that like button to go and like. But also, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, there's one. If you're not a subscriber to the channel, please do so. If you are not also a subscriber at TheChocolateLife.com, a member, there's a free membership opportunity. You can please go and do that and support both at YouTube or on Facebook or on TheChocolateLife.com. And Heather, if somebody wants to know how to get any of the things that we tasted here today, they can go to GoodSamFoods.com.
GoodSamFoods.com.
Right. And I noticed that there was a Black Friday sale.
There was.
Right?
Yes,
there was. It's over
now. It's
It's gone
over,
now.
but there'll be stocking stuffer sales and there'll be all kinds of things. So definitely when you go over there, sign up for our newsletter. We're always running sales, doing freebies. You know, you buy chocolate, you get some coffee, you get some macadamias, you get to try different things that we bring in, which is really, really fun too. So yeah, go over to goodsamfoods.com, follow us on Instagram at goodsamfoods, and yeah, let's change the world together.
I think that's a great way to end the hour. And I want to say thank you very much for everybody for joining us. Thank you, Heather. I would love to have you back a couple of months from now, see how
Yes.
things have changed in the new year. And with that, everybody, have a fabulous weekend. We'll be back next Friday, where we're going to be talking with Lars Muller, who's one of the founders of Ingaman Cocoa in Nicaragua, but is also doing some really, really interesting work in at a company called Agroclimatica, delivering weather and climate information to producers in a way that enables them to be able to increase their yields and reduce losses and other things. So that's what we'll be doing next Friday. And we'll be starting an hour early because Lars is in Denmark and he's 6 hours ahead of us. We'll be starting at 10 o'clock next Friday as opposed to noon. And with that, everybody, thank you very much. And we will see you back here next Friday on The Chocolate Life Live.